Okie dokie. 3 p.m. Pacific time, Wednesday, February 16th. And it's been a couple of weeks. So, hey, everybody. Anybody who's here yet? Pat, on the road but listening. Thank you very much. David, how's it going? And here we are on another Wednesday. Oh, it's not a Wednesday. It's a Thursday. I had to push to today because of a project I've been working on. Thaddeus, what's happening? Here's the update. Since the last time we had an episode, which I believe 2 weeks ago was with the three of us, myself, Ben Barden, and Caleb Pike, I got on an airplane. I flew to Florida, and I did a just under 1 week production. Fantastic to be out on the road again for something that was sort of a normal size production. So we were a crew of about 10 people. I was producing and directing. It was what I would call a documentary style corporate video project, which is sort of the type of stuff that I did a lot of before that whole thing happened back in 2020. Small Brown Fox, how's it going? Not sure if you're in the Lake District or somewhere else in the world, Brandon. Yes, a day late, but I apologize for that. Deadlines and things going on that I had to attend to. We were in the Palm Beach area of Florida. Weather was absolutely beautiful. I did have to do a red eye on the way out there, which I hate, but landed, and we scouted our 3, possibly 4 locations, but we kept it to 3. And each day we were in one particular location. So one was sort of administrators or the people from the main organization, and then we went to a couple of schools and shot there. Back in Baghdad, man, I want to hear more about that. Louder, good to have you. And there you go. So kind of a psycho post schedule, but we're in good shape on that. And we will, as far as we can tell, make our deadline and get everything out to mix and all that fun stuff. And here we are talking about all kinds of things, I think, but with a core focus on lighting. And what I want to do is open the forum, the chat, to questions related to lighting. So I know that at least historically, I get a lot of questions regarding that. So I want to talk about a few things. I've got Set a Light, which is an app that I showed last time I went over some lighting stuff that I think is pretty fantastic, which is great to talk out ideas and just sort of questions about lighting. There was something I saw that I thought was pretty interesting that was not lighting related that was just announced. Let me see if I can find it here. It's not the Nanlite 300B2, which looks interesting as well. It's something by Zoom. Did anybody see this? It's a little Zoom device. It's about $200 US, and it has 32-bit float. And I thought that looked pretty interesting. 2 input, and I don't know. I'm looking for it here. I thought it was on News Shooter's site. I thought they're the ones who posted it. I'm on their site right now, and I do not see it. So if anybody knows about that, let me know. But $200, I believe, but I'm not seeing it here on the site. Anybody can give me the name. FX30, nice, Ono. Zoom M3, there you go, David. And I think it's about $200 US, and it is 32-bit float. Don't know much more about it. Maybe Cine D has it. I know it was posted by somebody, unless for some reason they posted it and then they had to pull it. So let's see. Not on Cine D. Maybe it was B&H I saw it on, but there you go. It just came out. So let's see what happens. Get some questions going here in the chat. There's no set sometimes there are, but there's no set idea of exactly what we're talking about today. So this is open to questions, answers, hopefully some answers, both from people in the chat and from myself. And core focus on lighting, but it can drift, and we can talk about other things as well, just because that's what happens. Happy to talk about the shoot that we just did as well, talk about some of those setups. I don't have any reference frames that I can show you right now, but here we go. And at the C47, perfect, with a question and a colon or Q. Can a bicolor light be useful for indoor interview shoots? If so, how can it be used? Well, the answer very simply is it can absolutely be useful for indoor use, because you have the flexibility of generally changing your color temperature at minimum from about 3200 Kelvin, which is that warm, sort of more orangey light, to somewhere in the area of 5600 Kelvin, which is what we talk about as sort of a baseline for daylight, though the amount of Kelvin swing you can have for daylight is humongous. I mean, you could be up in 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 Kelvin, a much bluer light, depending on what time of day you're actually filming outside. But the advantage to bicolor is that it gives you the flexibility not only to dial in a very particular color temperature, but more importantly, try to match, if you're using practical lights or there's an ambient color temperature, match those more closely or dead on. Then, if you're using LED fixtures, if you have a magenta green shift option on the light as well, then that can be very helpful, because maybe you're in a space. A good example of this is you walk into a space and you do have to use the light fixtures that are there already. Let's say that those fixtures are fluorescent, and let's say that they spike a little bit green. Well, you could set up your lights and they could be perfect. They could have no spike green or magenta. But if the other lights in the space are, let's say, skewing more green, it would make a lot of sense for you to take a little fixture. I mean, this happens to be the Roscoe Dash. It does have a magenta green shift, and so do most new LED lights. And what you could do is you could essentially shift the lights more towards the green spike that's in the other lights in the environment. And then when you color correct, you're color correcting the entire image. If you're using a correct fixture, but you have incorrect fixtures in terms of in the space, then trying to match them could sometimes be the fastest way to go. There you go. So hopefully that answers the question. Plus, if you want to have flexibility of mixing color temperatures, then bicolor are great for that. But if I'm going out right now and I'm buying new lighting fixtures, I'm not necessarily going to buy an RGB based fixture, but I'm almost always going to see if they have a bicolor version of that. Daylight only is fine, but then you get into gelling if you're changing the color temperature, and gelling LEDs is not always the most successful way to go about it. LED lights tend to have a much narrower or different spectrum of color than you would find in a traditional quartz halogen unit, which this is just a fake Edison LED. But if you're talking about a bulb like this, and you put a new bulb into a fixture, it would have essentially full color spectrum, usually at around 3200 Kelvin. So bicolor is, in my opinion, again, um, the best way to go. But then when you're mixing lights from different manufacturers, that can also get a little bit messy. All right, let's see what we've got. I found this out the hard way, mixing 3 lights by 3 different brands. Yeah, that's messy business sometimes. David says it's the M4, actually. Zoom mic track 4, or mic. Okay, well, we'll look it up. I know it's a brand new little audio unit, so there you go. Do I watch any Gaffer channels? Definitely Meet the Gaffer for sure, and some other ones. There's one that I haven't looked at in a long time. Honestly, it's been a while, but Meet the Gaffer for sure. So Brandon says, we'll be working on stop motion flannel graph content in the next few weeks. Totally out of my wheelhouse. Any tips on shooting, editing this? Totally out of my wheelhouse as well. So I don't know. I honestly don't even know what a flannel graph is. I know what stop motion is. I know what MoGraph. I don't know what flannel graph is. So tell me. But I don't know if I can help you with that, Brandon. I mean, obviously, it's still just exposing something, and I don't know how complex the stop motion is. Is it a big set? Is it a small set? What's the deal with that? Yeah. All right. Show G Productions. What brand and model lights sub $500 do you recommend as a key and fill for indoor interviews? Well, the first decision you have to make is, are you going with a hard light source that you're going to modify to make it softer? Or are you sort of starting softer to begin with? I think there's advantages to both. Um, so if you're going bicolor, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm sort of two minds on this. In certain situations, I like starting with something that's already a little soft. For instance, the Nanlite mixed panel 150 is what I use over there, and it has this very neat little feature where when you press on a certain button on the back of it, it switches between sort of harder um, LEDs, even though it's in a panel format. And then there's sort of this other version where it creates this soft diffusion, which softens it up even more. And if it's got enough oomph, enough output, then if you bounce it, you can get really nice wrapped soft light, which is what I'm doing. I'm basically bouncing it off of a big white sound blanket. And that works out really well. And what's nice is when you're starting with the panel, it has a pretty broad beam already. And so when it's bouncing, it's just creating nice big light. When you're using chip on board, sort of more focus light, I have some around here, but I think you know what we're talking about. Then you generally have still a pretty good spread, but it's a more focused light generally. So when you want to soften that light up, you're going to put it in something like a softbox or back it up and push it through some sort of silk, some sort of rag, a fabric of some sort to get the look and feel of what you want. So for instance, on my recent shoot that we just did in Florida, we wanted to make sure that as we move from location to location and interview setup to interview setup, that the look and feel was very similar in terms of the way the light was falling on subject matter, the way that light wrapped. So, from what I recall, because I was producing and directing, and we definitely had a very specific look that we were going for, which I talked to the DP about. I think we wound up settling pretty much across the boards on an aperture 600. We use a 300 sometimes, but the 600 was the better fixture, primarily because what we were doing is creating a version of a booklight. And the booklight is, you're bouncing off of one sort of surface, and then that light's coming back or on an angle, and then it's going through some sort of modifier. So in the case of what we were doing in most situations was we were bouncing off of white, and that could have been a wall with a larger fixture that was a chip on board with barn doors, and then that was bouncing back and then through unbleached muslin, which is generally a pretty heavy fabric. But if you have a strong enough fixture and you push light through it, especially if it's bounced in a book light situation, it's incredibly soft and very flattering on skin tones. The fact that it's unbleached muslin also means that it's going to warm that light up a little bit, which may or may not be desirable for what you're doing, but generally seems to work very well. And then that particular DP was using a Schneider filter. I think it was a Black Magic filter at a 1/8 strength. And that just sort of softens up in terms of blemishes and things like that in the skin, but still makes sure that your footage is tack sharp. You have to be careful with filters sometimes because you can get a halation effect where light fixtures and things like that start to glow, and that may be desired in certain situations. Let's say you haze a scene and you want that sort of glow to happen, but sometimes you may not want that. So you have to play with different filters and test different filters from companies like Tiffin and Schneider and see what the deal is. All right, let's see. Here we go. Getting some answers here now that I went off on a tangent or whatever. Um, be quiet, Mr. Computer. Maybe I should quit my I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit the mail thing so I stop getting notifications. All right, let's see what we got. Only starting out with lighting, so big learning curve. Always lifelong. Wouter. It's the lighting is the thing that is going to be a forever. And that's why I like it so much, but it is very challenging and you just build on knowledge over time. And then when you think you've really got it, then you look at it and you're like, I really don't. I need to learn so much more. So, Amarin or Godox? Well, I have more experience, Brandon, with oh, it's not a question for me, but I have more experience with Amarin. I've used some Godox stuff, but mainly for flash, like off-camera flash and things like that. So I think that the advantage to Amarin, because it's part of the Aperture family, is the Sidus Link app, which is a very strong app in terms of lighting. But they're by no means the only company to look at for lighting. Nanlight's putting out some great lights, so is Aperture. And then, of course, you have your mid to higher tier lighting companies like Light Panels, and you have Quasar. Those are both under now Videndum, which used to be the Vitek group. You have Hive Lighting, which has some really interesting fixtures. You have Westcott's Lighting. They have some interesting stuff. Of course, Roscoe and their Lumiere lights. So it's just so many choices right now across the boards. But I think, as Pat is saying, he'd like a system approach. I think it makes a lot of sense because generally a lighting company will go down the road of building out their lights a certain way, meaning their formula. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to change it at some point, but we are seeing, for instance, that Aperture has sort of settled on this red, green, blue, white, white formula. So these 5 LEDs that they're using and mixing together to create all of their colors and their different versions of white, so on and so forth. Whereas some other companies are doing RGB ACL, which is amber, cyan, lime with RGB. There's no, I mean, I guess you would say the amber, but there's no, let's say, blue, um, bluish, daylight balanced LED inside of there, but they're taking those 6 LEDs, combining together to arguably get even more color spectrum out of the fixtures that are there. Um, Brandon says mainly tips on stop motion. Flanograph is the felt background with felt cutouts, mainly used for educationals. Copy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me, stop motion has so much to do with the actual um, individual exposures that you're getting in order to do that. I don't know if the ask is that you know how to do stop motion and then each individual frame. Um, I would probably err on smaller movements and more shots, I guess. But I would think of it in terms of number of frames per second and how that translates. But I'm sure there's a lot of data there. There's actually some really good beginner books on stop motion, which have to do with that side of it. From a lighting standpoint, it's just exposure. So it's really creating mood and figuring out where your light's going to be and what that light's going to do. Hopefully by next week, I'm going to have a little setup that I can show you where we can start to move lights around and start to take a look at some things in a way that I haven't done before. Um, which is going to allow us to have more in-depth conversations about where to place light, how to modify light, and what to do with that. So I hope that works out. I was hoping to do some of it this week, but I'm still waiting for some things to arrive. And so I'm hoping next Wednesday we get to do that. Any particular models and what brightness output? Well, from a lighting fixture standpoint, one of the fixtures that you might want to consider is the the Amarin P60C, and that's a relatively cost-effective panel-based light. Pretty heavy duty, not the best mounting system in terms of on your light stand. I've modified that, but for your money, in terms of pure output, um, you're getting an RGB based lighting fixture, but with all the flexibility of bicolor and just pretty remarkable output for the money. And that's a panel based one. And then you can start to take a look at some of the 200 to 300 watt fixtures out there from Amarin, Nanlite, Aperture, and see, if any of those seem to make sense. I'd say if you're looking for lights that are very flexible and allow you to do things where you might walk into the space and there's a lot of ambient light and there's a lot of things that you're working with besides a control environment, then at least in my opinion about a 300 watt chip on board or cob light would make sense. Ideally a bicolor unit so you have flexibility on that, but that doesn't mean you need three of those. You could get some smaller fixtures like some little 60-watt chip on board fixtures that would also ideally be bicolor, at least for that kind of thing. The P60C from Amarin is a good fixture to take a look at. Lots of different options there in terms of that. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Everybody's putting out lights now. We've got Small Rig, iFootage. We've got everybody else. It's just crazy. Um, and the app does make a difference, David. You're saying that the Astera app is horrible. And, having an app that is easy to use does make a difference, especially within the ecosystem. I still love having just sort of a physical remote control that allows me to turn a light on and off without having to fire up an app. I like that personally. I think it's has advantages. But if you can have both, where there's a little remote if you need it, or you can go into an app and just have more control having to do with controlling multiple fixtures at the same time, then I think that's the best of both worlds. Um, let's see. What do we got? Oh, what do you think of the LED light panels that are thin and flexible? They look like they would work well in a tight space, but just wondering what the quality of these panels are. Well, depends on who makes the panels. Westcott's are good. I have just tried on this shoot because the DP had them, the F22 from um, I guess it's technically, is it Amarin? It might be, or it might be Aperture, but it's all part of that family. The issue with those types of fixtures is the sheer output or lack thereof that they have. So we wanted to do something in a very small space where we still wanted that book light where you bounce and you diffuse, and it just didn't have the oomph that we needed, and we had to swap it out with a chip on board that had more punch and that could give us what we wanted. So they're great for travel. They are really, pun intended, flexible. You can gaff tape them to things, you can put Velcro on them, and you can attach them to stuff. You can wrap them around columns, and you can tuck them in little places in little ceiling areas and overhangs and stuff like that. So they definitely have a place. The question is, are they a primary fixture in terms of your everyday? And I think that depends on what you're doing. But if I was going to go flexible LED, in an ideal world, I'd probably get something that was at least a 2x2 or a 1x2 at minimum, just to have some output and flexibility. But yeah, I can show you the lighting setup I have for this stream, but I have to do that at another time because I'm not set up for it camera wise. I have done it in the past, and it's not really anything special, but I do have a big background behind me, which I'm using, and I think if I switch over here, you can at least see that. So there's not really a lot going on with that. Let me just see if I can turn on another light so you can sort of see it a little bit better. So if I switch over to here, you can see there's the background. This is a Manfrotto panoramic background that I'm using, and it just allows me to, if I want in this kind of setup, have something like this. And it's nice too because it has a lot of gray in it. So if you throw color onto gray, it will basically become that color. And if you throw color onto white, it's reflecting what you're pushing out at it. If you're pushing that light into something that's black, it's absorbing a lot of that. And those have advantages as well. But if you want to choose a background, whether it's a patterny kind of one like this, stormy gray or whatever, or you just want something that you want to throw color onto, then gray is generally the best way to do it. Just as an example of that, if I fire up this little Roscoe light, what I can do is just change the color temperature. I'm just going to actually fire up and throw this to 10,000 Kelvin, and then I'm going to go ahead and increase the intensity, and you'll see that when I start throwing that light onto something that's a gray background, it takes that color, which I'm using about 3,200 Kelvin right now for my main lights. And this is 10,000 Kelvin, so it's much cooler. And you can see that that gray is just taking on that color. So that's probably an important takeaway, that that gray is one of the most flexible background colors you can use. So if you have your choice and you're not going for that sort of, you know, um, Calvin Klein, you've got a celebrity in front of a white or, cyclorama, or you want to, do that thing, then I'd go gray. Gray is very, very flexible. So there you go. Let's see what we've got here. Have you ever messed with integrating Wi-Fi smart plugs into your studio setup? Not really Wi-Fi vast CNC, but I do have some lights behind this that are from Govee, Govee, which is a brand that you can get very easily on Amazon. I don't know if they own the brand or not. And I've bought a lot of lights from them because they're relatively inexpensive. Their app is easy to use and it's very flexible. So I kind of have these standing lights that I use that look like tubes, and I have other ones that push light, and they're they're also kind of tube lights that you can dial in, and they don't flicker, at least at normal frame rates. When you go high speed, I don't know what they're going to do, but they're great to just sort of create a little bit of mood or atmosphere in a space without having to buy incredibly expensive fixtures. But that said, where is it? That little, hold on. This little 1 footer from Aperture, this little MT Pro, which is their first, they have other tubes through Amarin, but this is their first tube that's sort of pixel based. We're going to start to see more of this. You'll see when you turn it on that it kind of does this little startup fancy pants thing. And this is a very flexible little piece of kit as well that you can have. And what I love about this particular one, the MT Pro, is it's a foot. So this can fit into anything. You can take this anywhere, just like you can with flexible LEDs and these little smaller lights like this with the dash. And this one has this magnetic diffusion and modifier system here. So it's very it's very flexible in terms of what you can do. There's even a little grid, though it's not really truly a hard light. It just helps sort of focus that light a little bit. Aladdin makes good panels, super light and accurate. I often travel with a pair of 2x1 RGB panels. Love them. Yeah, a lot of other companies out there doing those as well. And there are advantages to having a fixture you can just sort of roll up into a tube and throw into your bag. Then it just depends on sort of what's the controller and the quote unquote ballast and everything else, and how small is that. Good. David, currently debating with myself if tube lights are worth for quick interview setups without much time setting up light fixtures, modifiers, etc. I'm kind of torn on tube lights. even though I'm showing you one right now that's small, because they're incredibly handy for walk and talk stuff. They are generally rechargeable with built-in batteries, so you can just handhold them. The stuff we were doing last week with B-roll, they had a 4-foot tube that they were walking around with, which was very that was an Amarin tube, and it was very handy to be able to go around and just kick a little bit of light from one side or another. And it tends to be pretty broad, but it's not the same as when you're pushing light through a big modifier, 4 by 4, 6 by 6, 8 by 8. It just doesn't have that same look and feel. And one of the most important things that I look for as well is what does the catch light look like? How big is the catch? What's the shape of the catch light? And that's important when you're doing things. So if I'm using a light like this, when you're using a light like this, the catch light's going to be, like a ring light's going to be that weird shape. A catch light is also going to be, kind of a little strange. So if I just pull this down, I'm just changing the color temperature on this tube to around what we have here. And I put this on, and let's see if I've got the right remote. I have two of them here. No, of course I screwed that up. There we go. Boom. And then I turn this off and we see this. You should be able to see it, but the catch light is going to be basically, it's going to be straight down. That's what you're going to get out of your catch light when you are um, using a tube, and it'll be shorter or longer depending on the actual size of this and how close it is to the subject matter. But there is a great flexibility to having these when you're doing certain things and you're positioning them. I just don't feel like you're getting that same broad soft light that you would get from a larger fixture. How could you? Because that's just the shape of the fixture and what you have. So it just depends on what you're doing and the look that you're going for. These are great, and things like this are great also as background lights. Where you're throwing them out of focus and you're just creating a little bit of shape. Little things like this silly light here, you put this on a shelf somewhere, and it can create in the background somewhere just a little bit of visual interest. Too close to talent, not so much. So it just depends. Good. All right, let's get some more questions in here. Bill says, I have that MT Pro. I'm really digging it. Yeah, it's great. It even has like a little grid attachment I have over there you can put on there, which really focuses the light. So if you just wanted to kick a little bit of light on somebody, which I have here, but that's with a different fixture. This right here is just a light that's over there. You could do that with a tube light. It would work really well. But, you don't have barn doors on that necessarily. Actually, the ice light from Westcott has a barn door option, which helps, but it is a soft light to begin with. So think, sort of like KinoFlow tubes, but obviously in an LED form factor. David, I have a gaffing job coming up, and the director wants to blast the light from outside through a stained glass window. He wants shafts of light with haze in the room. Any tips? HMI. I'd use an HMI. You want a hard light source. It's going to be daylight balanced. You want strong beams of light. And once you haze that room, those beams need to be strong enough and hard enough to actually pick up to get those shafts of light. Then you could break that up a little bit if you want to by putting something in front of the light fixture. It could just be black wrap with holes or slits that you're putting through there. But I'd probably start with just an HMI. And if you put it into sort of a reflector that's a little bit harder and a little bit more focused, that's probably the way that I would go. I remember doing something a long time ago with Aries original LED Fresnel, and we were hazing the room, and it just looked plasticky. And then we threw up a Joker, I think it was an 800, or it might have been an Airy HMI, and the difference in terms of the quality of the light and the way the haze interacted with that beam of light made a huge difference. That's not to say that a chip on board LED with some sort of optical unit wouldn't give you a good look and feel, but I don't think you're going to get the same that you would get if you were going with an HMI. Doesn't have to be an HMI, but just like a really big high output quartz halogen fixture. But I would say HMIs would make sense. Also, the question is, what's the location like? Is there going to be a lot of available light when you shoot that, David? Is it going to be in the middle of the day? That's going to make it a little bit more challenging, or are you going to have some control over that and you're going to be shooting at dawn, dusk, or at nighttime, so that when you blast that light through the window, you're really going to see that. What is it that you're trying to do? Because if you're playing, sort of at nighttime, but you want to make it feel like it's daytime, then you're probably not just going to have lights blasting through those stained glass windows. You're going to need to do something where outside of those windows, you're bouncing light and having that come back in. And if that window is in the frame, then you might have to do something like a Roscoe soft drop or something in order to make it feel like you're seeing outside, even if it's out of focus. Um, but there's a lot of um bigger fixtures, like you're saying, the 1200. But you should try it first. It's pretty easy to do those tests. Obviously, the stained glass window is going to do a couple of things. It's going to break the light up a little bit. And part of that is because of the lead dividers and everything that's there. Part of it is obviously that it's going to slow that light down. You're going to lose quite a lot of light coming through it, depending on the type of stained glass it is and what colors are being used. And of course, it's going to change the color quality of the light, but that is generally going to be what you want in that type of situation. Um, so there you go. Let's see. Just reading these questions. Let's see. He wants to shoot during the day. Well, I don't know if 1200 is going to do it going through stained glass. Are you going to see the window in the frame? Because that also introduces other challenges. Obviously, the fixture can't be right outside of the window. If you're seeing that window in frame, it's going to have to be off to the side. And you don't want to bounce in that situation because you want to see the shafts. So I think it's going to be a little tricky. I would definitely go over it, and depending on how long the scene is and what you're doing, it might be better to shoot that dawn or dusk. If he wants to shoot or she wants to shoot all day long, then that introduces other challenges. And then, how big is this church? How much access do you have outside to where you're setting up? Do you need to tent, which means sort of, take visqueen or something and essentially close out outside available light? Or are you looking out into or out of that window? All of those things are important to talk out. And depending on that, you may have to rent a fixture or two for that shoot just to get enough exposure and the quality of light that you're looking for, David, for the shoot. All right. I have vast CNC seen the hobo or hobo, I guess it's hobo lights. Uh they're they're really they're cute. You want them just because of how cool they look. They kind of look like little retro, reminds me of medium format cameras and cool form factor. I don't know how really practical they are to the type of work that we do. They look kind of cool for some tabletop stuff and things like that, but I don't know if they're the right thing. Hold on one moment. Small room, not a church. Okay, well that's going to help you, but again, it just depends on what's going on outside. Um, yep, I agree with Harrison. If the sun's on the same side, you may run into an issue. So, I think time of day is going to be critical. Where is it? If those are north-facing windows, jackpot. but if they're east or west, you could have some issues during your shoot day. So that's it. These little things right here. This is the Lytra. I think this one's called the Torch. It's a little LED. I don't know if it's got any juice right now. It may just be dead. But this is a little tiny LED light. It's got a quarter 20 on it, and you can just put a little modifier on it. And for tabletop stuff, this could be great. Little lights like this. And I've seen that there are other companies now starting to put out, this is a daylight balance one, but there's companies putting out bicolor and RGB versions of these. And these are, again, these aren't great for lighting a bigger space or bigger subject matter, but they could be great for smaller types of things. What other questions do we have here? What do we got? Let's see. I'm ready. All right, let's keep the conversation going. And I still can't tell what the name of that product is. Let me look on. I'm talking about the Zoom thing I was talking about earlier. I'll check my email one more time and see if there's a link. It may have just been a B&H affiliate thing, but I thought for the money, it looked pretty darn impressive. Well, what's on paper isn't always what translates into the real world. So let's just see what it comes up with. NAB gathering, hell yeah. Um, this little light right here is kind of a hard light source. It's not a single, it's an array of LEDs. So it's 4x4. So you've got 16 tiny little LEDs in here. So it's kind of hard when you have this on, but at the same time, it's not like super hard light, is it? It's not. I can't remember what the plug is. It's not. I don't think it's USB-C. Let me see. Hold on. I haven't plugged this in a while, so that's part of the problem. No, it's not. I'll look it up. I'll get this thing fired up in the near future, and we can take a look at it. But these are pretty cool little lights, and they're kind of hardish until you modify them, especially if you're putting them close to something for tabletop and things like that. NAB, the show itself, let me see. I think starts on the 16th. So somewhere in that Sunday, Monday area will be when we probably get to, meet up. And we usually do something between the central and the south hall. There's sort of this outdoor area, and we usually meet up and, have a drink and hang out a little bit and chat, that kind of stuff. So we'll have to talk about that on the next Cameron Flask, which I can't remember what date we decided. I think it's getting pushed into March pretty far. Let's see, B&H. Let's see what they say. New gear. Is this it? Nope. Yeah, here it is. It's called this is a heck of a name. It's called the Zoom UAC-232. It's a portable 2x2, 2 in, 2 out audio interface, has 32-bit float recording, professional preamps, and easy mixing controls. And it's $199 US. So that's where I saw it. So UAC-232. So you can look that up if you want. So it's a little different. Okay, let's see. I did not mention, well, I did mention what key I'm using, which is the Mixpanel 150 from Nanlite. And then the only other really light that's playing right now is just a Felix P360 Pro. It's just a small chip on board light, and that's going through a smallish softbox, and that's what's creating the kick right here. And that's the deal. Am I shooting 3200 Kelvin? I'm shooting about 3400 Kelvin on my light, and then the cameras are set to 3200. So, yeah, that's what's happening. It's a little counterintuitive because when you think about light and you think about white balance, it can kind of do a number to your mind in terms of what you're doing. But essentially, when you are changing a light's Kelvin temperature, what you're doing is you are, as the higher the Kelvin temperature, the basically the bluer the light's going to be, and the lower the Kelvin temperature number, the more reddish it's going to be. I can just take this key light here and we can just change the correlated color temperature. So I'm just going to go ahead and start increasing that, and you'll see what happens when I start to increase it. Now I'm at 7,400 Kelvin, but the camera is balanced to 3,200 Kelvin, right? So then I'm going to go now back down and I'll go the other way. Now I'm at 2,700 Kelvin, and you can see what's starting to happen. And that's with the camera sort of fixed at you know, at 3,200. Now I'm back to 3,400 Kelvin. And then, of course, depending on your camera and how things are set up, you might do a green magenta shift. I have a little bit of a green magenta shift on this because I just wanted to make sure that these lights match pretty well. And then part of the problem also might be my settings inside of Ecamm Live, which can really screw things up or help you depending on what you're doing. So I can also change the color temperature in Ecamm Live, which is what I'm doing right now. So this is it just sort of at 0, and then I can warm it up or cool it down depending on what I want to do. So there's a lot of variables that can exist when you're doing this stuff. And sometimes the signal chain, if that's the right way to talk about it, kind of does weird things, especially with signals that are coming into a computer and being processed by things like Zoom and Ecamm Live. And you would think that everything's just neutral and, there would be no mix of anything and you wouldn't be doing anything strange, but that's not really the case. Vast CNC said, I would love a mini chip on board light that can do hard light well without a lot of weight size. Well, there's tons of options now. You've got companies like Westcott. They have a little 60 watt that I did some stuff on recently. You can see on the channel. That's a bicolor light. Nanlite has both bicolor and also RGB. Same thing with Aperture, Amarin. These little small COBs are not that expensive anymore, so there's no reason why you couldn't have that in your kit. Why not daylight for the lights and camera? Well, first of all, one answer is I find that 3,200 Kelvin or thereabouts color temperature, sometimes we refer to that as tungsten, I find it to be more comfortable in an interior location. I'm a big fan of warm light, and as long as I'm setting my camera to white balance, I don't really love daylight as my main source. I also find that when I'm shooting things at 3,200 Kelvin in terms of my subject matter, it gives me a little bit more flexibility to create a warm, cool contrast in the background as opposed to a cool, warm contrast. So if I was using daylight and I wanted to make this cooler, I'd have to use a very high Kelvin temperature. But if I'm using 3,200 Kelvin, then I can use, a daylight base fixture. For instance, I'll just change this to daylight now. So I'll change this to 5,600 Kelvin or thereabouts, and you can see here that that's still going to read as cool. So this is warm, that's cool because this light here is daylight balanced, and my key and my little kicker here is actually 3,200 Kelvin. So hopefully that answered that question. What other lighting questions do we have? Whether it's about fixtures and what you should be getting or thinking about getting, or it's just sort of tips on lighting. I did have an app open to sort of go over some stuff, but I don't think it's really relevant today. I think we're talking about this stuff, and with about 10 minutes left, I think we'll just sort of finish that. And then next time, what I'll probably do is have a little tabletop set up or something like that. And then I'll also have the Set a Light app ready to go if I want to show you something that falls outside of what I can do practically inside of the studio. Yeah. So what do we got? I'm ready. Questions? Got a few more minutes here. We can talk about something entirely different as well. Just looking over here if there's anything. There we go. Camille, Good to have you. It's been a while since I've seen you in the stream, I think. What's your favorite interview setup when you have minimal time on location? Good question, Thaddeus. I have a link in my description to this episode where I put up my first lesson on lighting on sort of my Teachable platform. That's using Teachable, which is just sort of a platform to post educational content and things. And in that, I really break down, it's a little down and dirty, but I think conceptually you'll get the idea. I break down split or side key lighting, where you're just lighting from one side. And it's probably the most forgiving if you do it the right way, because you're starting off with light that's just hitting one side of the face, and then it's split and it's dark on the other. And then when you bring in fill from the other side, it's going to basically even it out. And you don't wind up having a lot of issues with strange shadows being cast by a person's nose, so on and so forth. The other reason that split lighting is very forgiving is that the light is coming from the sides. So if you control it, it's not really hitting the background. And that can be a big challenge when you're in very small spaces when you're lighting. And that side or split lighting can absolutely be a book light. It can be just a light coming through a modifier, a large modifier. It can be through a softbox, which is also a modifier, but it's just obviously flagging the light on the sides. Um, and then grids can help a lot too when you put those in front of your light fixture to help focus it. But as soon as you start putting lights through modifiers, especially a softbox where you have a baffle, which is the thing the light hits first just to spread inside of there so you don't get a hot spot. Then you have whatever diffusion material you have in the front. And then you say, oh, well, there's too much spill. I'm going to put a grid there. Then the grid is generally black. So it's going to absorb a lot of light. And that's why you have to start thinking about, especially when you want to modify lights, either bounce or directly diffuse, but with other modifiers there, you have to really think about the output of that fixture, because you're cutting a lot of that light output with all of those modifiers. And so that's why I'm saying that, if you're looking at an LED based key light nowadays, one of the best ways to go is with sort of a 300 watt or higher chip on board light. You just have to be careful, because sometimes, depending on the light and the way it's designed, there's very few of those fixtures that are fanless. They do exist. This new one from Kelvin is a fanless design, so it's silent. But most of them have some sort of ballast. And if you can get that ballast away from the light fixture, then you won't have a problem with sound. But if it's right there and then you have your subject and then you have a microphone, that could be a problem sometimes. Um, a 300X with the light dome two as the key and the little fill, usually a bounce, is my go-to. Yep. Is it more practical, Bill says, to buy a bicolored light or just a daylight and use a gel? I spoke about this earlier in the stream. I'm not the biggest fan of gelling LEDs. Generally, daylight balanced LED that's a 300 watt will have more output than a 300 watt bicolor, because you have to generally mix your LEDs in order to get the color temperature you want. And as you start to shift your color temperature, depending on how they design the light, you're going to get one of two things happening. The light will dip and be lower at that intensity because of how many LEDs are firing and being used, or they might regulate it, but that will sort of stop the light from having its highest output at certain color temperatures when you're using the multiple LEDs together. So it just depends. No, Camille, it's not the backdrop is definitely not an Amazon thing. This backdrop is a little bit more expensive. Picked up the wrong remote. This is the panoramic backdrop from Manfrotto. Used to be Lastolite. And this particular backdrop, what I love about it, besides the fact that you can put different fabrics on it, is it's 13 feet wide by about 7 feet high. So what is that? 2+ meters high by, what is that? 4+ meters wide. So somewhere around there. Not inexpensive, but really flexible in terms of what you can do with it. You can put green on here, you can put blue, you can have something like this. They have another one that's like a granite style. I'd love it if they just had if they had just a plain gray, like a neutral gray. It is pretty far back, and that's what's great about it. It's 13 feet wide, so I can get it far enough away that it's not completely in focus. It has a nice drop off and pretty easy to, to lift that light or do something else with it if I needed to. So it's very flexible that way. David says practical, definitely bicolor, but if you have a lot of different light fixtures, gels are great. Yeah, they can be very handy. I mean, gelling a quartz halogen traditional light, gelling is no problem at all. You have full color spectrum. So the only downside is, let's say you took a tungsten quartz halogen fixture, 3200 Kelvin, full color spectrum, warm light, and then you throw a color temperature blue full, let's say CTB on there, essentially going to take you from 3200 Kelvin to 5600 Kelvin, and you'll still have that color spectrum. The only problem is that when you put a full CTB in front of a light, or a full CTO, if you wanted to go from daylight, let's say an HMI, and you wanted to read as a 3200 Kelvin, you're going to lose a lot of the output of that fixture with the gel. So there are advantages to having bicolor fixtures where it's actually from the light source itself, so on and so forth. How do you know that the mannequin's a she? Small brown fox. What's the deal? I don't know. Yep, still use them because they are very handy for lighting, but I have some other stuff coming up soon that I think will be good. We'll see how it goes from next week. Okay, good. What else we got? A couple more minutes. 57 after the hour. Tips on avoiding reflections in glasses in small interview setups. Well, the first one is going back to that split lighting. When you're lighting from the side and then you're filling from the other side, you generally have much less in the way of issues with reflections in glasses. Um, if you're doing something that's more camera side or more Rembrandt, sometimes it's just sort of the height of the light. But the thing that can happen, depending on the shape of the person's face, is you might lose that catch light. So you have to, no way, small brown fox, are you kidding? Um, the catch light is so important that sometimes what you have to do, which is not preferable, but it's going to get you out of a bind if the person who's on camera has to wear glasses, or it's sort of part of their brand or their look. Um, if they don't have any anti-reflective coating on their glasses, so on and so forth, and they sort of have Coke bottles for their lenses, then you might have to flip the key. And that's kind of a thing that you'd have to do. So you'd obviously not have as much shape on the person's face because you're not shooting into the shadow side, which is generally what we would do. We'd be shooting on the short, not the broad side here. But it could get you out of a bind in terms of flipping that key light to the other side. But split lighting, I'd try that and see if that's a good way to go. And the larger and the softer the key source is, the more forgiving it is when you see reflections in a person's glasses. So if you use something like, a good example would be Magic Cloth, and you had at least a 4x4 modifier and you're pushing light through that or bouncing and coming through it, or unbleached muslin, is it's so soft that when the glasses grab some of that light, it doesn't feel like a hard light source. You can kind of see that happening here because of this, but it is going into something that's quite large. And if you walk that in, it's even closer and it catches on the person's glasses, it can just feel like window light. It can feel like a big source that's bringing that light in. And so you don't get those tiny little catch lights and you don't get something that feels unnatural. Um, Interesting. Harrison says, I find gelling the 300D is about the same as what you get out of a 300X at 3200. You get about a third of a stop more with the 300D. There you go. That's pretty funny, small brown fox. I'm with you. I'm just messing around. The mannequins I have are, I guess they're female. Um, but I have these cool little things next week. I've got the first one. I'm excited. I think I'm excited. It might not all work out, but I'm going to need a macro lens for that one. So there you go. 4 o'clock. I'm finishing this thing. Hope this was a somewhat productive conversation about lighting. Next time we'll do something a little more practical. I'll have some sort of setup. I'll probably be wearing the Tony Robbins wireless headset because it'll give me the ability to walk around, and I'll have some sort of setup for that, I think. Should be next Wednesday, unless something comes up production wise for my clients that I need to make sure I am there for. Ono, thank you very much. Again, we're getting pretty close. We are pretty much exactly 2 months away from NAB. No challenge yet. I want to do a challenge soon. I really do. And I kind of feel like, Ono, that I'm going to call you Ono because Ono coffee is just too much to say. I kind of feel like where I'm going with some of this stuff that I want to do for lighting might be where I push the challenge, but it's going to require people to be on board. So let's see what goes on with that. Harrison, thank you. And thank you, everybody else, for coming to the show. Always appreciate you showing up and having questions and wanting to not only share information with the other people who are here, but also hopefully learn something along the way. There we go. You stay frosty, small brown fox in Baghdad, the opposite of the Lake District. I'm out of here. You guys are great. See you soon. Bye.